He and Mark Saraceni wrote a book, a reader's guide to Robert E. Howard, that was really the first critical overview of Howard's work. It looked at all of his work, not just the sword and sorcery stuff. Then they did a little publication called Cromlech. It was just a little chapbook journal, but it tried to be a scholarly journal, critical journal of Robert E. Howard studies, and they were only able to do a couple of issues of it. But I was so impressed with it that I used it as the model when I started The Dark Man. I felt like we needed to continue what they had done. And I have always given Chuck and Mark complete credit for the idea behind The Dark Man when I started it. They really began serious Robert E. Howard critical and scholarly study, I think. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Chuck and let him inform you about Conan and why we should read him.
Oh, thank you. Well, 80 years ago this year, Robert E. Howard first envisioned and wrote about what would become his most famous character, Conan the Cimmerian. In honor of this anniversary, I've been asked to talk about Conan here today, and I assure you no one needed to twist my arm when it comes to talking about Conan. When asked to give a title to my speech, I came up with All I Needed to Know About Life I Learned from Conan. I have some opening remarks, and I meander a little bit, but I do arrive at this main topic eventually, so please be patient. First, thank you all so much for having me. This is the greatest honor ever bestowed on me, and today is like one of the greatest days of my life. We live in a very materialistic society. Artistic and accomplishments that don't bring a lot of money tend to be regarded with indifference. So it happens that I mention my Robert E. Howard writings and my other writings to very few people that I meet. Why? Well, I just can't take their dumb blank expressions. Therefore, it's very moving and gratifying for me to be able to stand before a group of people who know who I really am. That people enjoy and appreciate my contributions to Howard studies means a great deal to me. It makes me feel that, in spite of everything, I've managed to do something positive with my life. All of us involved in Howard studies have indeed accomplished something very meaningful. By examining the artistry of a working class writer of popular fiction, we have, by extension, helped to emphasize the contributions that such individuals make to a vital culture. It wasn't all that long ago that critics divided all creative writing into genuine literature and popular trash. This is sort of like the Victorian view that there were only two types of women. It always saddens me to read the correspondence in which both Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft tend to disparage their own work, but they couldn't really be expected to understand what Leslie Fiedler called middle-brow literature, which is something that they themselves were just then helping to bring into being. Yet, if the authors themselves tended to undervalue their own work, it's hard to expect more from tradition-bound educators and critics. However, there were a few thinkers who were ahead of the curve. Raymond Chandler once wrote, "When a book, any sort of book, achieves a certain intensity of artistic performance, it becomes literature. That intensity may be a matter of style, situation, character, emotional tone, or half a dozen other things." Okay, this works for me. And that's the whole key to writing literary or artistic criticism. You have to find an approach that works for you. It's an art, not a science. One of my most deeply held convictions is that not enough attention is paid to popular fiction. We can see this with cinema as well as prose. No one will ever win an Oscar for playing James Bond. Critics will gush over even the most tedious slice-of-life drama, but tend to disdain genre fiction no matter how well done. Well, they can cry about it all they want, but The oldest and most universally appealing type of story is the heroic saga. And tales of wonder are also an ancient literary heritage. And Robert E. Howard, of course, was a master of both. But why, critics may ask, does any of this even matter? Of what importance is it in the grand scheme of things? I personally believe it matters very much. It matters because only a dream-inspired people are capable of rearing skyscrapers or sending men to the moon. Heroes of song and story inspire us. We lift our faces out of the muck. We look up and glimpse new vistas of human potential. We strive to be more. Heroes steer us away from a life of mediocrity. The daily grind, the workaday world, tend to diminish the individual. The heroic saga reaffirms our faith in the importance of what a single person can do. The heroic saga helps to strengthen the individual. And if you strengthen the individual, you will ultimately strengthen society, because society is made up of individuals. Unfortunately, this truth is mostly lost on society's traditional mentors and so-called leaders. Be they in the public or private sector, they, for the most part, are not up to the job of governing so many rugged individualists. Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote, "Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members." And it is so very true. What we used to call the establishment is aimed at turning out good little workers and consumers. To begin to fully appreciate Conan and what he has to teach us, let's consider a character I think of as the exact opposite of Conan. I'm sure, like all of you, have seen The Simpsons. Okay, there's a recurring character on The Simpsons, Gil, old Gil. And you've seen him, he's sort of like loosely based on Jack Lemmon and Glengarry Glen Ross. And every time he appears, he's being like beaten down and humiliated in some way. There's this one episode where he's like working as a telemarketer, and he's there. "Oh, what's old Gil got to do to keep you on the phone? Dance? But you can't even see me." "Oh, okay, yeah." Okay, well, you think that's funny? Well, this is what the world is working day and night to turn you into. Conan will save you. I think it's safe to say that Conan has made each of us feel stronger at some point. You may not be Conan, but you are more like Conan than you would have been without him. And I mean, personally, how did I manage to grow from like a pretty frail child to someone who was able to back down some pretty nasty characters in the New York subway? And where did I ever get the guts to set any kind of high goals for myself? If not from Conan. Heroes lead by example. They don't tell us what to do. Like Robert E. Howard himself, I was very skeptical concerning authority figures and what they had to say, even when I was a small child. Consequently, I ended up learning about values from things like, John Wayne westerns and detective novels and superhero comics. But it was with comics that I first got thrown a curve. And that was with Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's Spider-Man comics. For those of you not in the know, Spider-Man is like the big granddaddy of the beleaguered heroes like Jack Bauer on 24 and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, whose lives are basically ruined as a direct result of trying to help people. And from him I learned that just because you're awesome and noble and sweet and wonderful, doesn't mean that people will line up around the block to shake your hand. And the sad fact is that all too often, really good, decent, salt-of-the-earth people get the raw deal while buffoons and malefactors are rewarded. Okay, and so while I appreciated this heads up, I was sort of left at an impasse. I was left to like sort of puzzle over like how to cope with this situation. Enter Conan. Okay, when Conan is confronted by the horrors his world unleashes upon him, it's the horrors that discover they messed with the wrong guy. From Conan, we learned that you have to be tough enough to withstand whatever the world can throw at you, because throw things it will. And reading about Conan, we are moved to consider how hard one has to be to make it in a hard world. Making your way in the world often means fighting it. Doing things your way instead of someone else's way means bucking the status quo. Characters like the Shadow and Doc Savage and so many others were basically cops. Conan is a rebel. Howard was moved to depict Conan in this manner to his own suspicion and skepticism regarding authority figures. Now, we must admit, in all honesty, that Conan is a dark character in certain respects. In addition to being a warrior and a king, we also see him as a thief, a bandit, a pirate. In fact, Conan has been described as not so much a good guy fighting bad guys, but a bad guy fighting worse guys. But to me, the pirate ships, the robbers' bands, and the outlaws' dens that Conan joins are like metaphors for the vicious circles that we must, of necessity, learn to function in as we make our way through this life. And here I'm thinking of anything from like high school, competitive corporate environments, basically anything that involves cliques and factions. I think it's significant that Howard never actually shows Conan plundering the merchant ships or raiding the caravans and so forth. Rather, the whole point of this and the emphasis is on Conan fighting his way to the top of these vicious hierarchies in the most dangerous and hostile environments imaginable, and overcoming the baddest of the bad. There was a book some years ago about the cutthroat corporate world or some such thing. You may remember it was called How to Swim with the Sharks Without Being Eaten. Any of you remember that? I think it was like a pretty big bestseller. But, okay, Conan swims with the sharks, but he eats the sharks. He eats the sharks like potato chips. In Conan's saga, we see an allegory about life. I've been told that Elsbrey de Camp was dismayed by the ruthlessness Conan exhibits in one particular story, The Black Stranger. Conan is indeed something of a, to put it mildly, a scheming bastard in this story, but only when dealing with the pirates, players like himself on his level. We must also consider his generosity to the innocent Blessa and Tina. And sympathy is for the underdog is like a redeeming trait for some of Howard's more roguish characters. Throughout the saga, Conan's judgment concerning who deserves his sympathy is pretty sound. You can only do so much for so many. Therefore, compassion is not something to be squandered on the contemptible. And as far as honor is concerned, I'm reminded of a remark by Dutch Ernest Borgnine in Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. It's who you give your word to. And speaking of Westerns, I'm reminded of a quote from another Howard hero, Breckinridge Elkins. I don't start trouble, I end it. And like Conan, he sees no particular need to be gentle about it. Many heroes take it upon themselves to end trouble, but their motives differ. They may be motivated by altruistic benevolence or misanthropic vengeance. They may be driven by guilt or fanatical zeal. As heroes go, Conan has a pretty healthy mindset. What he seeks is to savor the good things life has to offer. So do we all. We're just a lot more easily thwarted than Conan is. Conan is basically out for himself, but when he does attain a position of responsibility, he never fails to rise to the occasion. And when Conan sees something he doesn't like, he can do something about it. In combating some horrific or evil menace in pursuit of his personal goals, he removes said horror and prevents it from doing further harm. And one of Conan's lessons was similar to sort of what Ayn Rand was saying in The Fountainhead. But I got it from Conan, and that's that my, personal, individual, goals, dreams, and ambitions, not just those values we all share, but my personal goals and ambitions have value. Before you can be any good for anyone else, you have to be good for yourself. You must attempt to fully realize your own best self-image. You must not only survive, but prevail. All told, the lessons I've learned from Conan, well, not really everything I needed to know about life, but they do have more practical, real-life applications than any I've encountered elsewhere in the realms of the fantastic. That includes superhero comics and even stuff like James Bond and all sorts of other things. And now I have a few concluding remarks aimed at clearing up some possible misconceptions. When I was talking about the importance of heroes and heroic sagas earlier, nothing I said about the importance of heroes to our inner lives should be taken to imply a sort of hero worship or a rock star groupie sort of relationship. That's because it's a two-way street. We do as much for our heroes as they do for us. We keep them alive. We defend them from hostile critics. Conan, for all his prowess, has taken some terrible beatings. And I'm not talking about stuff like his crucifixion in A Witch Shall Be Born. I'm talking about poor movie adaptations, poor pastiches. And I just vividly remember going out of my way to explain to people like, Conan isn't this, he's this, and more recently the Disney Studios threw the John Carter movie under the bus, and poor old Edgar Rice Burroughs, right along with it, which I thought was really, really bad. So right now, I and some other people, we've been active on the internet. We're networking and defending the reputation of the film, and by extension, that of Burroughs himself. And this is important because, this is when you get to be a hero to your heroes. It wasn't all that long ago that Robert E. Howard was dismissed as a blood and thunder Paul Pack. So many of us here labored long and hard to change that perception, and ultimately we did succeed. So, in conclusion, take care of your heroes, and your heroes will take care of you. Thank you. Who's next?